The calligraphy was beautiful. That's the detail that stays with me. Whoever printed it had done clean, careful work. The kind of lettering you pay extra for at events like this. The kind that's supposed to make guests feel like they matter. My place card at my wife's company gala read, "Idiot trash." I turned it over once, checked the back as if there might be an explanation printed there. There wasn't. I set it back down exactly where it had been. Then I looked up. 20 feet away, my wife Claudine was laughing with her hand pressed flat against Preston Kilgore's forearm. Her boss, her confidant, the man she talked about at dinner like he was the only person in Seattle who truly understood her. Both of them were glancing toward table 14 with the specific, unmistakable body language of people watching their joke land. Preston said something else. Claudine's head tipped back. She actually had to dab beneath her eye with the corner of a cocktail napkin. She was laughing so hard she was crying. 600 people in that ballroom. The jazz trio playing near the bar. The chandeliers throwing gold light across the room. And my wife in her emerald dress, laughing at a card that called her husband idiot trash. I sat with that for exactly 90 seconds. Then I stood up, straightened my jacket, and walked across that ballroom toward a man named Desmond Ruiz, who had flown in from Chicago that morning and who almost nobody in that room knew existed. I leaned close and said 2 sentences in his ear. He nodded once, the small economical nod of a man who deals in decisions, not discussions. "Understood," he said. "That's your call to make." I found my wife's coat at the coat check, told the attendant I'd forgotten something urgent at home, and walked out into the Seattle rain alone. By Monday morning at 9 o'clock, an all-staff email had gone out to 1,100 employees. Subject line: Company ownership transition, effective immediately. Every position in Preston Kilgore's department, terminated by lunch. My name is Sterling Vance. I'm 48 years old, and until that Friday night in October, my wife believed I was just a quiet man with a boring consulting job who paid half the mortgage and stayed out of her way. She had no idea I owned 61% of the company she worked for. She had no idea because I made absolutely sure she never would. I live in Laurelhurst, a quiet tree-lined neighborhood on the shore of Lake Washington. The kind of place where the houses are old money and the lawns are cut every Tuesday whether they need it or not. I drive a 2019 Honda Accord. I wear the same 3 navy sport coats on rotation. I've eaten lunch at the same deli on 24th Avenue for 9 years. And the woman behind the counter, Donna, knows my order before I open my mouth. Turkey on rye. No mustard. Nobody who met me at that deli would ever guess that 14 years ago, I sold a logistics software company for $340 million, and quietly rolled a portion of that into a private holding company that, among other things, owns the controlling stake in Bellwether Meridian Group, a mid-size marketing and events firm headquartered in a glass building in downtown Seattle. My wife has worked there for 6 years. She has never once suspected that the silent majority shareholder she complained about over dinner, some ghost investor nobody's ever met, she called him, was sitting across the table eating his turkey sandwich and nodding along like he had no idea what she meant. After I sold my software company in 2011, I didn't want the life that comes with obvious wealth. I'd watched 2 of my old business partners implode within years of their exits. One was divorced inside 14 months the moment his ex-wife realized what he was worth. The other got swarmed by cousins and old college roommates asking for just a small loan. I decided early that my next chapter would run through a private holding company, Vance Meridian Capital, registered in Delaware, operated by a small tight-lipped team, and that my name would never appear anywhere near the businesses I invested in. I bought stakes in 6 companies over the following decade. A regional bank, 2 logistics firms, a specialty pharmacy chain, a boutique hotel group, and in 2017, a 61% controlling position in Bellwether Meridian Group, which at the time was a struggling 12-person event shop I saw real potential in. I met Claudine in 2013, 2 years after the holding company was already running. By the time we married in 2014, the wall between Sterling the husband and Sterling the majority owner was already built. When she talked about her work, I asked normal husband questions. How was your day? Is that client still difficult? Did you get the Henderson account? I never once let on that I had personally approved the acquisition that folded her tiny firm into what eventually became Bellwether Meridian Group. She joined the renamed, expanded company in 2018 thinking she'd simply landed a good job at a growing firm. She had no idea she was walking into a building I owned. For 6 years, I sat across from her at dinner and listened to her talk about corporate like it was a distant, faceless weather system that occasionally rained problems down on her department. Corporate wants us to cut the Q3 budget. Corporate is being cheap about the holiday party again. Corporate doesn't understand what we actually do down here. I nodded. I asked follow-up questions. And every single time I already knew exactly what corporate wanted, because I was the one who'd approved it that morning from my home office, 2 floors above her head, while she got ready for work. It should have felt like a betrayal keeping that from her. For a long time, honestly, it felt more like a mercy. I told myself I was protecting the marriage from the complications that come with a spouse who has real institutional power over your career. I told myself she'd feel watched, second-guessed, undermined at every promotion and raise if she knew her husband was the man behind the curtain. I told myself a lot of things. Some of them were even true. But somewhere around year 4, the marriage started shifting in a way no theory about privacy and protection could explain. Claudine started coming home later, taking calls in the bathroom with the fan running. She stopped asking about my day, not out of hostility, just a kind of quiet erosion, the way a habit disappears once nobody's tending it anymore. And she started talking about Preston Kilgore differently. Not as her boss, as her person. Preston thinks. Preston said. Preston's the only one at that place who actually gets it. I noticed. I always notice. It's the thing that made me good at building companies. And it's the thing that made those years harder than they needed to be, because I could see the shape of what was happening long before I had anything solid to stand on. I decided early that I would not confront shadows. I would wait for something solid. The first solid thing came 18 months before the gala. Bellwether Meridian's board, my board, was reviewing department performance ahead of the fiscal year. Claudine's team had submitted a proposal for an expanded events budget, nearly $400,000 for a series of high-profile launch parties for a new hospitality client. I read every line. The proposal was bloated. Nearly $90,000 of it was allocated to a brand experience consultant who turned out, on closer inspection, to be a company owned by Preston Kilgore's college roommate, an arrangement that had never been disclosed to procurement. Killed it. Sent it back through the CFO with a note asking for the conflict of interest to be resolved, and the budget resubmitted at a more defensible number. Standard governance. The kind of thing a majority shareholder does 11 times a year without anyone downstream ever knowing his name. What I didn't expect was that Preston Kilgore, rather than absorb the correction like an adult, would spend the following 2 weeks loudly blaming some ghost investor upstairs who doesn't understand how relationships work in this industry. And that Claudine, my own wife, would come home and repeat that exact phrase to me at the dinner table, almost verbatim, with a contempt in her voice I hadn't heard directed at me in years. Preston says corporate killed our whole launch plan over some technicality. Some faceless guy who's never run an event in his life decided he knew better. She rolled her eyes. She actually rolled her eyes at the idea of me, without knowing it was me. I sat there with a fork of salmon halfway to my mouth and felt something in my chest go very still and very cold. It wasn't rage. Rage is loud and burns itself out. What I felt was quieter than that and much more durable. The specific, settling recognition that my wife had chosen a side without knowing there were sides to choose. And the side she'd chosen was working actively against the thing I'd spent a decade building. I didn't say anything that night. I asked her to pass the asparagus, but I started paying attention differently after that. Over the following months, the pattern solidified. Claudine's late nights clustered around Thursdays, the day Preston's calendar showed block time labeled simply strategy session. She bought a new perfume, something warmer and muskier than the light citrus she'd worn for years. Her engagement with our marriage thinned to the structural minimum. Shared calendar. Grocery lists. The occasional obligatory Sunday dinner with her parents in Kirkland. I did not hire anyone to follow her. I didn't need to. I had 6 years of records sitting in the company's own expense and calendar systems, because Preston Kilgore was sloppy in the particular way that men get sloppy when they've never faced a consequence for anything. 2 dinners a month, sometimes 3, at restaurants nowhere near any client Preston's team actually serviced. A small Italian place in Madison Park I recognized because I'd taken Claudine there myself on our 5th anniversary, for its private back room. And one hotel charge from July, One night at the Fairmont downtown, filed under Client Entertainment Northgate account, except Bellwether Meridian had no active Northgate account that year. I am by training and by nature a man who reconciles numbers. And numbers that don't reconcile bother me at a level deeper than emotion. The numbers didn't reconcile. Neither did my marriage. Going back through 18 months of records with the patience of a man who used to build financial models for a living, I found a pattern so consistent it could have been charted on a graph. Claudine and Preston Kilgore had been having an affair for at least a year and a half, conducted almost entirely on the company's own money, filed under expense codes so lazy a first-year auditor would have caught them. In a company I happen to own 61% of, there's a particular kind of humiliation in that specific detail that I don't think most people would understand unless they'd lived it. It wasn't just that my wife was unfaithful. It's that she was unfaithful using my money, laundered through expense reports I could have flagged with one email, in a building whose lease I'd personally guaranteed, under the nose of a man everyone in that building had been trained by years of my own careful invisibility to consider irrelevant. I made a decision in September, sitting alone in my home office at 11 at night with the Fairmont statement glowing on my second monitor. I was not going to confront Claudine across the kitchen table. I was not going to serve papers quietly. I was not going to fire Preston Kilgore in some procedural HR meeting he'd spin into a story about a jealous ghost investor with no spine. I was going to let this play out exactly the way people like Preston and apparently my wife assumed the world worked, where confidence and charm and a good table at the annual gala meant you were untouchable. And then I was going to end it in a way so complete and so public that neither of them would ever again make the mistake of underestimating a quiet man in a navy sport coat. The Bellwether Meridian Fall Gala is the company's marquee event, held every October at the Fairmont Olympic downtown. 600 employees, clients and vendors, a plated dinner, an open bar that runs until midnight, and a stage where the outgoing president Harold Whitfield gave a speech about the year's growth. I had never attended in 6 years. I always had a reason, a business trip, a scheduling conflict, a headache invented on the spot. Claudine had long since stopped asking me to come. This year, in early October, I told her I wanted to. I want to see where you spend all your time. She looked at me for a second like she was recalibrating something. Then she smiled the bright, 2-second smile she'd started using on me sometime in the last year. Of course, honey. I'd love that. I spent those 5 weeks doing 2 things in parallel. In public, I was the attentive husband, asking about seating charts and what I should wear, letting Claudine believe this was a sweet, overdue gesture from a man finally taking interest in her career. In private, I was on the phone with Harold Whitfield twice a week, laying the groundwork for something Harold didn't fully understand yet, but trusted me enough to execute without too many questions, because in 6 years I had never once steered him wrong. I had also, in that same window, quietly finalized the sale of Bellwether Meridian Group. Let me be precise about this because it's the part people find hardest to believe. I didn't invent a sale to punish my wife. I had been fielding a serious acquisition offer for over a year from a large national events conglomerate called Ashford Bell Partners out of Chicago, who wanted Bellwether Meridian's Pacific Northwest client roster, and were prepared to pay a premium that made the deal, on pure financial terms, one I would have taken regardless of what was happening in my marriage. What the affair did was give me a reason to stop dragging my feet on the timeline. Ashford Bell had one non-negotiable condition, proposed by them, before I ever mentioned my personal situation: a full restructuring of the client engagement division. All current positions eliminated and replaced by Ashford Bell's own team within 90 days of close. That condition existed on paper before October ever happened. October just told me exactly when to sign it. I finalized the term sheet on a Wednesday in mid-October. Closing was set for the Monday after the gala, contingent only on my signature and Harold's operational sign-off. Harold knew the sale was coming. He did not know the personal reasons I'd chosen that particular weekend to execute it. I told him only what he needed: that I wanted the announcement to go out first thing Monday morning company-wide. No advance warning to any department head, including Preston Kilgore. Harold, bless him, is the kind of operator who doesn't ask a majority owner why. He just asks what time. The night of the gala arrived cold and clear, one of those rare dry October evenings Seattle gives you right before the rain settles in for 6 months. Claudine wore the emerald dress. Driving downtown, she checked her lipstick in the visor mirror and looked genuinely happy in a way I hadn't seen directed at me in a long time. And some tired old-fashioned part of me still wanted, even then, for there to be an innocent explanation somewhere in that ballroom. There wasn't. The grand ballroom was lit gold. Jazz trio working through standards near the bar. 600 people moving through the kind of evening that was designed to feel significant. I checked our table assignment at the entrance, table 14, and Claudine drifted off almost immediately toward the champagne, the easy, practiced motion of someone returning to her natural habitat. I walked to table 14 alone, found my seat, picked up the small calligraphed card to check the spelling of my own name. An old habit from a lifetime of business dinners where nobody ever gets it right. Idiot trash. I turned it over, checked the back, set it down exactly where it had been, looked up. 20 feet away, my wife was laughing at the joke landing. I learned later from Harold, and from the head of catering, who I called personally the following week, exactly how it had happened. The seating chart had been assembled by an events coordinator on Preston's team, a 24-year-old named Bailey, who did whatever Preston told her without asking questions, the same way everyone on that floor had learned to operate. Preston had told her, as a joke, to swap out the calligraphed card at whatever seat belonged to Claudine's husband, the boring one. Bailey printed it exactly as instructed. Preston's plan wasn't sophisticated. It was pure cruelty for its own sake. The casual, confident cruelty of a man who had never once been made to feel small, who had spent 6 years absorbing the idea, largely from Claudine herself, that Sterling Vance was nobody worth being careful around. I sat down at table 14. I did not flip the card over dramatically. I did not storm across the ballroom. I picked up my water glass, took a slow drink, and I watched my wife laugh at a joke made at my expense, orchestrated by the man she was sleeping with in a building I owned, at a company I controlled, funded in part by expense fraud I'd already documented in a folder on my own hard drive. And somewhere in that stretch of 90 seconds, the last soft part of me that had spent 5 weeks quietly hoping for an innocent explanation finished closing itself off. Cleanly. Permanently. Like a door settling into its frame for the last time. I stood up, straightened my jacket, and I walked across that ballroom toward Desmond Ruiz. 2 sentences. 1 nod. Then I got my wife's coat, told the coat check attendant I'd forgotten something urgent at home, and walked out into the Seattle rain that had finally started. I drove home through the rain alone and sat in my study until nearly 2 in the morning, finalizing the last details with Harold and my legal team. Because once you've decided to pull a thread like that, you don't sleep until it's fully unspooled. Claudine came home around 1, Uber from downtown. She found me still awake at my desk. What happened to you? There was an edge of real irritation in her voice. Not concern. Irritation. The tone of a woman whose evening had been mildly inconvenienced. You just disappeared. Preston thought it was so weird. I saw my place card, I said. Completely level. She actually laughed. A short, surprised huff before she caught herself. Oh, come on, Sterling. That was clearly some seating mix-up. Bailey probably grabbed the wrong template. It's not that deep. You and Preston seemed to think it was pretty funny. A pause. Half a second too long. It was just a weird moment. People were laughing at the absurdity of it, not at you specifically. She crossed her arms. You're being sensitive. I looked at her for a long moment. This woman I had built a decade of my life around. Standing in the doorway of my study in her emerald dress with her makeup slightly smudged, telling me I was being sensitive about a card that had called me idiot trash in calligraphy in front of 600 people. I'm going to bed, I said. And I did. And I slept better than I had in months, because for the first time in a year and a half I wasn't carrying the weight of not knowing. I knew everything now. I just hadn't told her that yet. The email went out Monday at 9:04 a.m. I know the exact time because Harold texted me a screenshot the second he hit send. A habit we developed over the years whenever something significant crossed his desk. Bellwether Meridian Group. Ownership transition announcement. 6 paragraphs. Corporate bloodless, entirely accurate. The company had been acquired by Ashford Bell Partners effective immediately. As part of the integration, several departments would be restructured over the following 90 days, beginning with client engagement effective that Friday. All employees in affected roles would receive transition packages, and were asked to meet with HR that afternoon. I was at home when Claudine's phone started buzzing at 9:06. I watched her face from across the kitchen island as she read it. Watched the color actually drain out of it the way it does in old movies before someone faints. Oh my God. Her voice barely above a whisper. Oh my God, they sold the company. Sterling, they sold the whole company. Nobody knew. This came out of nowhere. I have to call Preston. She called Preston 7 times over the next hour. He didn't pick up once. I found out later that Preston Kilgore had spent that entire morning in a closed-door meeting with an Ashford Bell integration lawyer and 2 HR representatives, receiving the news that his position, along with 11 others on his team, had been eliminated effective end of week, and that given the documented misuse of corporate funds discovered during due diligence, misuse I had personally flagged in the data room 3 weeks earlier, his severance package would be considerably smaller than his contract otherwise guaranteed, and that Ashford Bell's legal team would be reviewing whether to refer the expense fraud to outside counsel. Claudine did not lose her job that Friday. Her coordinator-level role technically survived the first restructuring wave, though under a new manager flown in from Chicago who had zero patience for the kind of long lunches and Thursday strategy sessions the department had apparently grown accustomed to. I never once used my position to have her specifically terminated. I didn't need to. I had built the whole structure so precisely that I never had to touch her career at all. I only had to remove the man she'd built her second life around, and the culture that had let him operate the way he had for years. That Monday evening, Claudine came home from what remained of her office looking hollowed out in a way I'd never seen before. She sat across from me at the kitchen table, the same table where I'd sat 18 months earlier, listening to her mock a ghost investor while a fork of salmon hovered halfway to my mouth. I don't understand what happened, she said. Nobody saw this coming. Preston said the company was solid. Preston doesn't know anything about who actually owns that company, I said. He never did. Something in my voice carried more weight than the sentence itself. She stopped, really looked at me. The way you look at someone when a shape you've never been able to see suddenly resolves itself in the dark. What do you mean, Sterling? I told her everything. Not cruelly, not as a performance, just flatly the way you give a board a difficult quarterly report. Vance Meridian Capital. The 61% stake I'd held since 3 years before she ever walked through those doors. The April budget I'd killed that she'd come home and mocked at this exact table. The Fairmont charge. The canless dinners. The 18 months of expense reports that didn't reconcile. The 2 sentences I'd said to Desmond Ruiz at a gala she'd humiliated me at. And I told her last, calmly, that the acquisition had been in motion for over a year on its own financial merits. That all her affair had done was help me stop hesitating about the timing. She didn't scream. Some part of her, hearing it laid out in order, understood immediately that screaming wouldn't move a single piece of what had already happened. She just sat there very still. Then, after a long time, you let me humiliate you at the gala. You just sat there and let me. I've been letting you underestimate me for 6 years, I said. The card just made it easier to stop. The papers are in progress. I've stopped expecting that to feel like a tragedy. Claudine moved out in November into a rental in Ballard, still working what remains of her job under new Ashford Bell management, chastened in a way that would almost be sad to watch if I let myself feel sorry for her. Most days I don't quite manage it. I don't particularly try. Preston Kilgore is fighting the fraud referral with a lawyer he can no longer easily afford. As far as anyone knows, he hasn't found new work in this city, because it turns out the events industry in Seattle is smaller and gossips more than he ever accounted for. I still eat lunch at the same deli on 24th Avenue. Donna still knows my order. I still drive the same Honda Accord because it runs fine, and I've never seen the point in a car that announces things about a man that aren't true. I sold my remaining stake in Bellwether Meridian to Ashford Bell as part of the same closing. Cleanly. Completely. Because once you've cut a rotten thing out, there's no reason to keep standing near the wound admiring it. I kept the other 5 companies. I'm building a 6th. People who don't understand men like me assume that staying quiet for years means you're weak or slow, or that you simply haven't noticed the disrespect accumulating around you. It's the opposite. Quiet is a decision. Quiet is what lets you see the whole board instead of just the piece someone's trying to distract you with. My wife spent 6 years laughing at a ghost investor she thought was too dull and too irrelevant to ever matter. Right up until the morning that ghost investor's signature ended her boyfriend's career and dismantled his entire department in a single email. She called me idiot trash on a printed card in front of 600 people. I answered her with 2 sentences and a Monday morning nobody in that ballroom ever saw coming. Some men need to raise their voice to be taken seriously. I've found over a long career and an even longer marriage that the men who actually run things rarely need to raise anything at all. If this story hits somewhere real, drop it in the comments. Subscribe if you want more. And if you've ever been underestimated by someone who had no idea who they were dealing with, this one's for you. I'll see you next time.